Hi, everybody. So this is going to be our discussion and close reading of the categorical imperative, which is the selection from the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, which is the full name of the text that Immanuel Kant wrote that we are reading this little piece of as our section on deontology. And deontology is a principle-based ethics, which in sharp contrast to utilitarianism is not focused at all on the consequences of our actions, but instead the principle, the incentive, the push, the idea, the motivation by which we choose a particular action. So I am going to share my screen with you and do this little presentation here. I hope you can see this. So Kant is a German Enlightenment philosopher who, in full disclosure, I love. Now, you might say, she said that she was not going to bias our discussions by revealing her personal views. Well, just because I love Kant does not mean I necessarily agree with everything he says. I mean, do you all have siblings, right? Like you can totally love somebody. You can totally love their ideas, the way they think, respect them and not completely agree. So, that's the case with me. I don't necessarily agree with everything, but I am partial to the way that he sees the world. So, the reading for this is fairly dense, as you've noticed, because you should be watching this after you have already read this selection, these pages, the first time. There are full paragraphs that are a single sentence. That kind of mirrors how I speak, so I don't really mind it so much, but I understand for some people it can be infuriating. So hopefully after listening to this, some of the reading will make a little more sense. You see that he goes through 4 scenarios, not the same 4 scenarios we talked about with utilitarianism, different set of scenarios. And we will be spending our class time talking on Zoom, talking about those scenarios in some detail so that we really understand what he is saying in terms of how his moral theory operates. Now, for each of the moral theories, I've given you some thumbnail sketch, some motto or short way of remembering what it's all about. And for deontology, it is do the right thing, come what may. Again, total rejection of that utilitarian idea that somehow we should only be looking at the outcome of our actions. He instead thinks we should be well-intentioned, reasonable, rational people. And if we're doing our best to be the best versions of ourselves in terms of our rationality, then that is where our moral worth comes from. And even if things don't work out the way we intended, at least we tried. So again, he doesn't fall victim to this idea of unintended consequences of our actions somehow messing everything up in terms of what we should have done. He thinks, as long as you approached it with a clear head and I guess a clear heart, because it's about being moved properly in one direction or another, then you've done the right thing. So let's get into it and see what exactly he is saying. Okay, that's the wrong slide. So let's try it this way. Sorry about that. So he begins by saying that the value is the goodwill. I'm not giving anything away by telling you this straight out because it is the first sentence of the text, page 103, right? Where he says, it is impossible to imagine anything at all in the world or even beyond it that can be called good without qualification except a goodwill. Now, let's think back to the Euthyphro dilemma. Remember that the Euthyphro dilemma was, are the good things good because God loves them? Or does God love good things because those things are good? Well, here we get Kant fully endorsing the second prong, the second choice in this scenario, in this dilemma, because what he's saying is that volition, the act of choosing, correctly, is the thing that is good without any qualification. So we aren't reading more Kant, but I did, so I can tell you that Kant is a believer in God, but he is not a divine command theorist because he does not think that God makes things good the way that Euthyphro does. He doesn't see God as the author of morality. Instead, he has that notion of God or Jesus or whatever divine figure a divine theorist is following as being that reliable teacher, guide, or instructor of morality, because he believes that this divine being could choose certain actions, right, in accordance with rationality, and that we each have within us what he might call the divine spark, or you might call our conscience, which gives us the ability to look around and choose wisely, to use our rationality to make the right choice. So he goes on to say that, for people like maybe Ayn Rand, the ethical egoist, although remember, she came well after his time, centuries after his time, a century after his time. He says that power, wealth, honor, even health, that well-being and contentment with our condition that we call happiness, that can make people bold, but often reckless as well, unless a good will is present to be correcting the influence on the mind and adjusting the whole principle of one's actions to render it conformable to universal ends. Consequently, a good will seems to constitute the indispensable condition even of our worthiness to be happy. Okay, so you should underline that sentence on page 103 at the bottom of the first full paragraph, which is, I think, only 2 sentences long. He's saying we can't set what we want as the greatest value, the thing to pursue, the thing of greatest value. We can't set happiness as the greatest value, the thing we need to pursue. We have to set the goodwill. Now, the goodwill does not mean like in some kind of Christmas carol, peace on earth, goodwill towards men. That it's not just this kind of happy feeling. It's not this benevolent feeling. It is proper execution of rationality in thinking, as he says here, of universal ends. Okay. Universal ends. We'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about it in class. I want to give you at least an overview of the reading. He wants us to be rational moral agents, and he believes if we execute our rationality correctly, if we don't allow ourselves to be pulled off course, tempted by things that are irrational, moved solely by emotion and not by reason, if we stay the course, then we might eventually be worthy of happiness. But now he's going to say that actually doesn't come until after you're dead. Your goal in this life, your goal of ethics and morality is to do your best to exercise a good will. And then if you succeed, you'll find out after you die because you'll go to heaven. Okay, in a nutshell, that's what he's saying. Now, it doesn't depend on that. His theory does not depend on that. You do not have to be some religious follower to agree with the basic principles of what Kant is putting forward. So from this point on in our discussion of Kant, we are not going to reference God at all, because his moral theory can exist without a belief in God, because again, like Plato, like Socrates in Plato's dialogue. He is not following the divine command theory line that somehow belief in God, piety, is the only way to have a good life. Instead, it is something you can come to yourself through your own use of reason. Okay? But I wanted you to have that other stuff on background. There are a few other things that we'll need in terms of vocabulary before we go on with Kant, but let's just finish out this page here. He gives this example about, you have to have moderation of your emotions, passion, self-control, self-reflection, and all of those things are not good without qualification, right? You have to describe the proper use of those different virtues or faculties. For without the principles of a good will, even those qualities could become exceedingly bad. The passionless composure of a villain makes him not merely more dangerous, but also directly more detestable in our eyes than we would have taken him to be without it. So again, this idea that somebody who's a bad person through being overly passionate about something, overly excited about something, that is even more understandable to us than the person who is calm, cool, and collected and just doing really bad things, right? We're more scared by the person who's able to keep their composure under pressure in that sort of way, right? They seem not affected by things that make other people upset. And we will see this when we talk about things like euthanasia, things about like the death penalty. We get into those discussions. There are circumstances where we think it's right for people to be upset or to react in a particular way. And what Kant is just saying here is that sometimes this idea that not responding based on emotion, not engaging your emotions at all. There are some people who might say that's a good thing, like a divine command theorist might say there's no room for you to talk about how you're feeling about something. You just do what you are told by your religion. And what he's saying is, no. Being devoid of feeling like that can also be the hallmark of a very bad person. So that itself cannot be the marker of what's good or bad. So it has to be the goodwill. So bottom of page 103, a good will is not good because of its effects or its accomplishments, and not because of its adequacy to achieve any proposed end, something it sets out to do. It's good only by virtue of its willing. That is, it's good in and of itself. So what Kant is saying here is your ability to be a rational moral agent, to be moved by your conscience, to act upon what you feel and recognize as the right thing to do in that situation for anybody who finds themselves in that situation. That is what is of supreme value. That is the character trait you are trying to develop and cultivate in yourself. So then he says this funny thing, which I just felt like I should draw your attention to. Even if it were because of some particularly unfortunate face or the miserly bequest of a stepmotherly nature, that your will were completely powerless to carry out its aims. So, like, even if you are like not well favored in society, either because of how you look or because you're a stepmother, still, with the utmost effort, it's even if with the utmost effort, it still accomplished nothing, so that it was only the goodwill remaining, right? The desire to do right. Even then, it would still, like a jewel, glisten in its own right as something that has full worth in and of itself. So you could be to put this in more contemporary context, like you could be the most downtrodden person in all of America that nobody listens to, that nobody pays attention to, completely overlooked, needs not met, can't get a word in edgewise in any political or social discourse, economically disadvantaged. If you are trying, even if nobody's listening, even if all of your effort doesn't pan out, even if every door is closed in your face, the fact that you tried is what has moral value. That's where the merit comes from. So it's an uplifting theory, right? That you just, by virtue of trying, you get the credit. And now it's not about getting credit, but again, this is the idea. You're building this possibility of some worthiness of happiness because you're just doing things because it's the right thing to do. So before we get to the bottom of page 104, let's go on here, if I can change the slide, to some of the vocabulary that you need to know. Now, this is kind of misleading. It's not that the vocabulary itself is Kantian, like he invented it. Well, some of it he did invent, but the vocabulary doesn't have this quality of being Kantian. It's like, in order to understand Kant, you need to know these things. The first thing is he keeps referring to maxims. A maxim is a fancy word for a rule, okay? So he will say, if you want to set forth a maxim of action, what he's really saying is, if you want to come up with some rule of how a person should respond in this situation, that's a maxim. The next concept, and that's what we see developed here on page 104, is this notion of duty. You might be familiar with the concept of duty. You know, sometimes people think about it in terms of military service. If you join the military, you have certain duties to uphold. If you are a parent, we think you have certain parental duties. It's another word for obligations, right? And obligations that we think are significant and that you are doing something wrong. They're, sets of responsibilities that if you were to shirk them, to not do them, we would think that's bad in some way. And the reason that it generates moral worth for Kant is because it's tied to a rule, and that rule tells us how people should act. So you have an obligation to act the way people should act. If that sounds redundant, wait till we get to the categorical imperative. You'll see how he puts this into practice. So, speaking of imperatives, imperatives are rules that govern action, okay? So this is where you get this sense of duty. You are rational because you recognize there is a rule and it causes you to act. You think, aha, that makes good sense. I ought to do that. So he divides those into two categories, hypothetical imperatives and categorical imperatives. Let's pause there for a second and look at page 104. So he says in the second full paragraph, it's a duty to help others where one can. And besides this, many souls are so compassionately disposed that without any further motive of vanity or self-interest, they find an inner pleasure in spreading joy around them, taking delight in the contentment of others, so far as they've brought it about. But I maintain that however dutiful and kind an action of this sort may be, it still has no genuinely moral worth. Okay, all you do-gooders out there, helping others because you like to help others has no moral worth, no genuine moral worth, because it's on a level with other inclinations. For example, the inclination to pursue honor, which, if fortunate enough to aim at something generally useful and consistent with duty, something consequently honorable, will deserve praise and encouragement, but not esteem. For its maxim lacks the moral merit of such actions that are done not out of inclination, but out of duty. So what's he saying? Is he saying that you have to hate doing the right thing in order for it to be praiseworthy, in order for you to get some moral credit, in order for it to be morally worthy? maybe not that strong, but check out this next sentence, right? Suppose the mind of this humanitarian that we just described were overclouded by sorrows of his own, which extinguished all his compassion for the fate of others, but that he still had the power to assist others in distress, right? It's not like he's lost all of his capacity, his money, to render aid. Suppose that the adversity of others no longer stirred him because he's so preoccupied with himself. And now imagine that no longer moved by any inclination, he nevertheless tears himself out of his deadly apathy and does the action without any inclination, solely out of duty. Then, for the first time, his action receives its genuine moral worth. So, again, the end of this paragraph, it's precisely that the worth of character begins to show. A moral worth, and incomparably the highest, is in doing good not out of inclination, but out of a sense of duty. So it's not like in the examples we've given before, you see someone hurt and you think, oh my goodness, I cannot bear to see somebody hurt. Let me go do something. Instead, it's like, well, I see somebody hurt and I'm late for work. But as a general rule, people should not ignore the painful situation of another person if they're actually able to do something about it just because they're late for a meeting. I wouldn't want everybody to act that way. So I guess duty, a sense of duty, tells me that I need to stop and help. But it's an inconvenience to me. I might suffer for it. I don't really like it. Let's say it involves wading into a shallow pond that's very cold. I'm not going to enjoy myself helping this person. And maybe this person's going to be really ungrateful and not even say thank you, but just like kick me in the shins and run off. The fact of the matter is, I did it just because I recognized it is the right thing to do. So on page 105, he uses this word maxim that I told you is a rule. The moral worth of an action done out of duty has its moral worth not in the objective that's being reached by that action, but in the maxim in accordance with which the action is decided upon. So again, it's not that I'm saying, oh, I want to help this person because then that person's going to be grateful to me, or then I'm going to feel good about myself, or then I can tell people that I helped someone on the way to work. I'm doing it because, as a general rule, I think one ought to render aid to someone in need if they are able to. Okay, so he defines duty, page 105 here, the necessity of an act done out of respect for the law. Again, when he's talking about the law, he is talking about general rules of morality. He's not talking about legality. And let's just see, page 106. The moral worth of an action depends neither on the result expected nor on any principle of action that borrows its motive from the expected result, because you might have achieved that end by some other means. It might not have been the case that it required the will of a rational being to produce that, but it's only in the will of a rational being that the highest and most unconditional good can be found. Okay? So again, this is an important point on page 106, which I assume is why the editor of this particular edition italicized it. The idea of the law in itself, the moral law, which certainly is present only in a rational being, is the preeminent good that we call moral worth. Okay. So again, he's saying we have this capacity. We have this capacity to be rational, moral agents who can look at a situation and say to ourselves, not what should I do, but what should be done in a situation like this. I can make a generalization about the right thing to do in a situation such as this. And then I actually have the capacity to look at that rule and say, aha, I feel bound by that. I have a duty to put that rule I just came up with into practice. You'll see how this works in a little bit. Okay, so let's see. The distinction here between hypothetical and categorical imperatives he goes into when you're hungry. If I'm hungry, then I should eat a sandwich. That is something that he would say makes good sense. That tells you, practically speaking, the steps you need to take to achieve your objective if you're rational, right? If you said, if I am hungry, then I should eat laundry detergent, that would not be rational. So that would not be a good rule. That would not be a practical rule to follow. By contrast, a categorical imperative, which we're going to talk about some more, says it is necessary in this situation for someone to act this way. And since I am someone, I have to act that way. But again, we'll get into this some more. There's one more term that actually doesn't appear so much in the actual text, but it is a fundamental concept in Kant's philosophy. And it really is the essence of a lot of what we're going to be talking about, especially when we get to the humanity imperative, which we'll talk about in a minute. And that is this notion of reciprocity. It could all be so simple, but you'd rather make it hard. Loving you is like a battle. Yes, I'm playing music. And we both end up a star. Lauryn Hill news right here. Tell me who I have to give so reciprocity. See, no one loves you more than me, and no one ever will. Okay, so I'm really having fun with these prezzies, if you cannot tell. So there's Lauryn Hill in a very excellent song from the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, telling us that there is a fundamental problem in our interpersonal relationships if we are not in a situation of reciprocity. That is a Kantian theory. I mean, I'm not saying that she intended it that way. I don't know if she's a Kant scholar, but I'm telling you, she's got it right there, that what she's talking about in terms of reciprocity is exactly the idea that underlies Kant's philosophy here. So what he's saying is that if I am a rational moral agent, then that means when I interact with other people in society, because remember, I mean, as we learned when we were critiquing Ayn Rand's theory, no man is an island. We live in and amongst other people, which means we are going to have to react to and with other people. So in order for that to be meaningful, I have to value myself and others, and I have to expect that others will value themselves and me in return, to the extent that I am being a rational moral agent. Now, we're going to talk later, and again, death penalty group, and some other group, maybe World Hunger and Poverty, environmental ethics group, we're going to talk, an animal rights group. This is to the extent you are behaving in a rational manner. I'll tell you right now, Kant was a supporter of the death penalty because he felt that if you went out and murdered somebody, you had destroyed the reciprocal nature of that human interaction because you treated somebody without regard to their moral worth, to their rationality. And you diminished yourself in the process because you reacted either in a cold, calculated way or according to, excess emotion, but you let go of your rationality and you destroyed the rationality of another person. So he supports the death penalty in cases like that, but it's a little bit of a tangent. But it gets to the point. Let me put it in a less extreme sense and something you can directly relate to. Think about your group work, okay? You are working in a group, and I told you that if I get the sense that the effort of all group members was equitable, it's not going to be equal. Not everybody's doing the exact same work, because then that would be redundant. You'd have 5 people just doing the same thing. What's the point of group work? The idea of group work is that everybody contributes something a little different because they have different perspective, different talents. They divvy up the effort, and everybody benefits from that. It's mutually beneficial. You do your part of the presentation, and someone else does their part of the presentation, and the whole presentation is better, and you each reap those benefits, right? So it's a more complete presentation, and you earn a good grade that you can all share because you all participated in an equitable way to that, forming that product, right? So what this is really saying is, don't be a freeloader, and don't allow others to take advantage of you. So when Lauryn Hill says, tell me who I have to be to get some reciprocity, she's saying, like, I am who I am, yet, and I am in this relationship, and I am being loving, and I'm being great and wonderful, and I'm not getting that in return. That either means I am somehow not performing to my best, so you're not giving me your best in return, or you're just taking advantage, and that isn't right. Either way, it's not right. There needs to be a correction. And that is what Kant is saying. We exist in a society where people need to be treated equitably. Again, not necessarily equally, but equitably. And it is a function of people's rationality, the goodwill that is exhibited by and towards others. So again, we'll talk about that some more, but again, don't be the freeloader in the group who expects to not do anything, show up the day of presentation, stumble through some slides that somebody else prepared in your absence, and then expect to get a good grade. No. Nope, I'm on to that. So people will be graded in a way commensurate with their effort. And if it looks like your group worked really well together, you'll all earn the same grade. Hopefully that's an A, right? But even if it's not, you all get the same grade. If it's clear to me that some people put in more effort than others, you'll be graded commensurate with your effort. So to me, that only seems fair. And to Kant, that would seem fair. Okay. So reciprocity, very important. We'll get to that again as we talk about what the moral agent needs to know and some of the criticisms, frankly. So you should know that Kant offers 2 general operating principles in this excerpt. He actually offers 3 total, but this is an intro ethics class. We're not getting into the third. So one is called the categorical imperative. One is called the humanity imperative. According to Kant, both of them, so you've already seen the video about how to make a good argument, right? And how your first premise is your general operating principle. According to Kant, you could use either one of these general operating principles, and you would come up with the same conclusion when presented with the same facts of the same case. The difference for him is that he thinks some people are just going to be more inclined to think about things in the way he thinks about them in the categorical imperative, and some people are going to be more inclined to think about things from the humanity imperative perspective. It's kind of a matter of taste. And what he's going to say is that Maybe you think one more immediately jumps into your mind or applies to a particular situation. He doesn't really care which one you use. It will come to the same conclusion for slightly different reasons. So we get on page 108, his introduction of the categorical imperative. And he says there's only one categorical imperative, one thing which tells us about universal law and tells us that according to that universal law, certain actions are necessary. And it is act always and only according to a maxim, a rule, which you can at the very same time will that it should become a universal law. So let's unpack this a little bit. We already know the act always and only, right? He thinks this is it. Pick a rule in a given situation, which you think at the very same time, right? Meaning under the same conditions in any scenario, should be the way anyone in that situation should act. Okay, so what he's really saying is you are not allowed to make an exception of yourself. So here's an example. I am at Wegmans and I really love sour gummy peaches. Okay. And I think to myself, man, I got a lot of shopping to do and I'm kind of tired. If I went to Bulk Foods and just grabbed a couple sour gummy peaches to eat while I'm shopping, I'd get through the store a lot faster. And I think I'm going to go do that. So as I walk over to Bulk Food, if I were thinking I was going to put my hand in the thing of sour gummy peaches and take some, I'd have to ask myself in that moment, do I think that anybody who decides that they need a little pick-me-up should be allowed to take something that is in a store that they didn't pay for and are not going to pay for out of convenience or on a whim? No. Am I willing to universally condone shoplifting? No. Why? Because the very idea of shoplifting, if everyone did it, would mean there would be no grocery stores, right? No grocery store would exist under the premise that you come in and you get things that you want or need and pay money for them, if in reality you were able to take anything you wanted without paying for it. It wouldn't make any sense. It would be illogical. I can't authorize something that undermines the system that I actually think works. So I can't do that. And I can't say, yeah, but I'm really hungry. Or, yeah, but they're really tasty. Like, no argument is going to make it okay for me to make an exception for myself. Now, you might say, well, wait a second. What if you have diabetes and you're going into insulin shock and the only thing you know will keep you alive is 3 sour gummy peaches, and in the amount of time it would take you to put them in the bag, put the label on it, and get to the cash register and pay, you would already be passed out. Would that be a situation where it's okay? Well, Kant would say, well, can you make a general, universalizable, that's the word he uses, universalizable and the universalizability test for that rule? Could I make that rule that anyone facing an imminent health crisis should be allowed to access a remedy that is not a huge impediment to people's livelihood, and would allow for a future correction of that temporary slip up? Sure. Okay. All right. I'm essentially saying you can take that now and pay for it later because it's an emergency. That's not making an exception for yourself. That's making a new rule about emergencies. Okay? I'm asking you if you can see the difference, but I am talking to a screen because this is recorded. So I don't know if you see the difference, but I'm going to ask you in class if you see the difference. So be thinking about that. We are going to spend a lot of time in class or virtually on Zoom talking about how this actually works, because as you see from pages 109 to 110, he gives you 4 examples of how this works in real life. So read those, spend time with those. It boils down to you can't make an exception out of yourself, but that will not count on the exam. You need to actually have the categorical imperative as I've written it here or as it appears in the book, because it's slightly different, but it's the same thing. Okay. The humanity imperative, right? Page 111, he says, well, there's another way we could look at this. And he starts it by saying, listen, humans, I want to say that every human being, and in general, every rational being, okay, think about this animal rights group, because this is going to cause controversy. I'm going to tell you right now, Kant did not think that animals counted as rational beings that deserved, full rights and consideration. But he also had limitations on the kind of like abuse or neglect that you could impose on a non-rational animal. But he also thought that children and probably women at the time were not rational either. So again, it's not perfect, but be thinking about these kind of things. They form the basis of certain arguments that you will see in the materials for your group presentations. So he says again, now I say a human being, and in general, every rational being, does exist as an end in himself, not merely as a means to be used by this or that will as it pleases. In all his actions, whether they're directed to himself or to other rational beings, a human being must always be viewed at the same time as an end. Beings whose existence depend not on our will but on nature still have only a relative value and are therefore called things because they lack reason. But rational beings are called persons because their nature already marks them as ends in themselves, as something which ought not to be used merely as a means. And consequently, that imposes restrictions on our choice making. Persons, therefore, are objective ends, things whose existence is in itself an end, and an end such that no other end can be substituted for it. If this were not so, there would be nothing that has absolute value anywhere. So this is unconditional value. So he says, because he believes that persons, rational moral agents, have so much intrinsic value, are worthy of so much respect, that the humanity imperative tells us we must act always and only to treat humanity, that rational moral agency that people have, both in ourselves and in others, always as an end in itself and never merely as a means. Okay? That means when group work happens, I can't say, well, you're really smart. Why don't I just let you do this for me? No, because now I'm using you merely as a means to my end. My goal is to get a good grade. I'm going to use you to do the work because I think I have a better chance of getting my objective, getting my goal, if I just let you do it. No. That's disrespectful to you, making you do the work that I should be doing. And it's also disrespectful to myself because I'm undercutting my own value. I'm giving myself a pass. I'm not being the best version of myself. I'm being a freeloader. I'm being disrespectful to the very idea of myself as a capable moral agent. This is what Kant is saying. Don't take advantage of other people and don't let anybody take advantage of you. That's what Lauryn Hill's asking, right? In this song, X Factor, she's saying, what is up with you? I'm doing everything I can to try and be the best version of myself in this relationship, and I can't get anything back from you. So, like, you're taking advantage of me, and that is me not having respect for myself, which is why the song is called X Factor, because they're breaking up, because she recognizes she cannot continue to be disrespected like this. It's not right. Again, Kantian song. This entire class should have a playlist. There's so much music out there that dovetails with what we're talking about. But okay. So that's the humanity imperative. I think the last slide I have here is that even though there are these two general operating principles that derive from the same value, right? The goodwill, right? This notion of humanity as rational moral agents who have the ability to make decisions because humanity is just endowed with this ability to make decisions. That's what makes people people. That's the value of humanity. I have one thing that the moral agent needs to know, which should ease your mind a little bit. You don't have to remember two different need to knows. I need to know that I am a rational moral agent among other rational moral agents. Okay, so it's both an affirmation of my ability to be rational, moral, a person. It's an affirmation of my own humanity, as well as the humanity and capacity and morality of other people. And when I say the morality of other people, it doesn't mean you just accept that everybody is good. There are going to be people who do bad things. But he's going to say, if people do bad things, you have to hold them accountable for that. Because if you give them a pass, if there's really no excuse for what they did, if they made a bad choice and you don't hold them to account for having made a bad and hurtful choice, then you're not treating them like full moral agents. You're babying them, you're coddling them, you're enabling them. You have to treat people as rational moral agents, unless they're not. And like I said, he does think there are classes of people who aren't really rational moral agents. But I want you to think about that as well. And again, this comes back to euthanasia, death penalty. I don't want to say it doesn't apply to the other groups. Oh, the pornography and censorship group is definitely going to talk about this stuff, right? The question is, or the point for Kant is, you have to know that you as a person have worth. Humanity has worth. And because you participate in humanity, that means you, by definition, have worth. And so do other people. Can't be ethical egoism. It's not all about you. It's not trample on everybody else to get what you want. There's no virtue of selfishness, according to Kant. This is about a mutual endeavor. You and other rational moral agents trying to navigate this world, being respectful of yourself and respectful of others, helping people without being taken advantage of, letting others help you without taking advantage of them. That is Kant's moral theory. We will look at the examples in the book again. Like I said, he gives you 4 examples. He gives you these 4 cases to show you how the categorical imperative works in practice. Then he gives you the same 4 cases and shows you how the humanity imperative comes to the same conclusions for different reasons. So he's helping you out. So read it again, and this is what we're going to be talking about, not just this week, but next week as well, because like I said, it's pretty dense stuff. But I do hope that you are enjoying it. And okay, I will see you virtually in class.